So here's something really cool. For a while, I've been investigating what happens if you model the universe as a superfluid, and I'm excited to share that I found the math that puts all the pieces together in such a clean, satisfying way that we have something big to talk about. I call it the substrate framework. I'm an engineering fellow at Posit. We make open source software for data science, so I'm a novice when it comes to physics, but good at debugging. This is a side project that started in June last year when I saw one of the first Vera Rubin images on a 5K monitor. This image led to the realization that dark matter has to be dark material, vortices and orbital systems spinning at close to the speed of light. Eventually, this framework emerged that answers big open questions intuitively with equations that match from the microscopic to the galactic. These 5 visionary works join to make the bridge equation. Volovik's work is the core of the superfluid model. Bush, Oza, Coudet showed that frictionless fluids work a lot like quantum dynamics. Semyonov bridged fluid dynamics to quantum mechanics, and then Curie found the superfluid nature of dark matter. The substrate framework bridges the domains covered by general relativity and quantum field theory without uncertainty or warping of space and time. And along the way, it makes more sense. It explains those distant galaxies that don't fit. It offers a more accurate model for the observations of dark energy density, energy clumpiness, and expansion. If you're curious, let's start at the beginning. Rather than a Big Bang, I've taken to calling it our big bubble. It's one of many, so I use B0 to be precise. It formed when its internal pressure built up enough like a steam bubble in a pot of water. Everything we have ever observed is the interior of this bubble and the wall it carved when it formed. And we know it's not the first one because the previous bubbles left a moraine that our bubble passed through, like a wave washing over a sandbar. It eventually will hit a beach in the substrate, and as it recedes, the black holes will build up pressure until they pop in a cascading way for B+1. The framework supposes that there are at least 2 particles in the bubble. One is tiny, I call it DC1, dark carbon, lighter than the electron by a factor of millions. The other is much larger, dark silver, 1,000 times heavier than DC1 at least. The smaller particles, lighter, vastly more numerous, form a superfluid that spins with angular momentum from the creation event, and it fills the universe. There's nothing that removed this material from the space or inside the atom. The big particles, DAG, form the core of larger orbital systems that serve as anchors, pinning the lattice and holding the layers taut. The lattice cell size, about 100 micrometers, the width of a human hair, falls out of 3 measured numbers: the speed of light, Planck's constant, and the dark matter density. That's the key part of the bridge equation. Before I show you how atoms form in the substrate, let's see what all fluids do with lots of shear energy between boundaries. Look at the bands of Jupiter, eastward and westward jets separated by turbulent shear zones. Each band is a co-rotating flow. Each boundary between them is a counter-rotating layer where the 2 flows grind against each other. And when wind blows over water or 2 cloud layers move at different speeds, the shear becomes unstable and rolls up into vortices. This is a microscope image of vortices in a superconductor. Near its threshold, when individual quanta of magnetic flux break through the superfluid, forming this hexagonal lattice. Notice the scale here is 100 micrometers, the lattice cell size. That's a happy coincidence. Now imagine this same pattern, but in the dark matter superfluid that fills space. It's the same physics at a different scale. Here's one key scale invariant pattern you'll see again and again. Every boundary between co-rotating regions spontaneously generates a counter-rotating layer. So the same spin regions in blue and the counter-spinning boundary layers are in red. and the number of boundary layers between two regions, odd or even, determines whether the system behaves as a charged particle, a fermion, or a neutral particle, a boson. Fermions include protons and electrons that form matter, and bosons can move freely like photons. This model cleanly explains spin statistics, the Pauli exclusion principle, and how matter and radiation emerge from the same substrate. In the substrate, due to the rotation speed of the superfluid, the elasticity, the stiffness of the lattice, a large enough disturbance becomes a topological defect. Or in other words, a big enough storm becomes a permanent feature. It could be a vortex core or a knot formed by three vortices that lock into place. On the left is the lattice with a 100 micrometer scale. It's the perturbation envelope, or the wake distance of the electron, the width of a human hair. In the middle, zoom in 1 billion times. Here's one DC1 vortex in the lattice. It's a quantum. These are the vortices in between boundaries. On the right, zoom in 100,000 times, and you see the three interlocked channels in a knot to form a proton. Here's the electron in the substrate. It's a storm with a pilot wave, not a dimensionless point. It breathes. It throws off a large rippling wake. It has two counter-spinning layers and explains the weird spin properties where it takes 720 degrees of rotation to return to its original state. Now see how the electron's pilot wave ripples around the orbit. And when the circumference is exact multiple of the wavelength, it forms a standing wave. The substrate locks into a self-reinforcing pattern, a co-rotating flow in the orbital channel, what I call the raceway, with counter-rotating eddies at the channel edges. The electron is surfing the groove it carved in the medium. The wavelength ensures only certain orbits will work. That's the quantization with no uncertainty. It's just a vibrating object in a wave-supporting medium with memory orbiting the nucleus. And the quantum potential, the mysterious Q, is the very real reaction force from those counter-rotating eddies at the channel edges. When a photon hits a hydrogen atom, it can change orbital states in various ways. It can inflate up to the next quantum, or it can fold. And when it folds, it creates either a radial node or a nodal plane. This is a fundamental substrate behavior. Compare these nodes to polar jets, a feature of planets, stars, and galaxies. All are passing along angular momentum to the next layer in the substrate. As an orbital system tilts in the lattice, the jets increase like a water skier leaning into a turn. The jet flow causes stabilizing pull from above and below as the lattice sheets redistribute that polar energy. And the spinning mass with its angular momentum weaves into the plane of the lattice. Those two effects combined form like a springing mattress that works at all scales and distances to move the photon modons through a least energy path. And vortex lines act like superfluid wires to hold it all together, and at the same time hide it from observation. It perfectly mimics a vacuum. And the speed of light c is a property of the substrate, computed from three measurements, set by the medium, the way the speed of sound is set by air. Metals conduct electricity because they're packed closely enough together that their outer orbitals merge, creating a merged channel. The smoother the merged channel, the more easily electrons can move and the better it conducts. On the other hand, for metals to superconduct, they need a defect to create a disturbance that puts the two electrons into an opposite breathing phase. And when this happens, they form a superconducting pair with a counter-spinning center vortex. Here's how a photon modon is created. In an atom, when an electron drops from a higher orbit to a lower one, the standing wave, the two oppositional layers with locked vortex lines, have energy that has to go somewhere. When the boundary collapses, those two layers fold into a modon, two oppositional vortices with ejection and driving force. The oppositional rotation pulls it along the lattice, each one in the velocity field of the other. And when the modon hits a boundary in the lattice, the two cores swap spins. The dipole continues, the same energy, the same speed, opposite-handedness. Nothing is lost. And the modon is massless because its two halves carry equal and opposite angular momentum. The net is zero. It travels at exactly c because that's set by the medium, the opposite spinning vortices spinning at 3/4 c. Okay, the counter-rotating boundary layers that wrap every particle do three things. They push back against the internal flow, that's the quantum potential. They eject the photon modons, and they leak. A tiny fraction of the DC1 particles, roughly 1 in a quadrillion per interaction time, transmits each of the counter-rotating boundaries, carrying momentum from one massive system to the other. That trickle is gravity. This is important. It's the same substrate boundary layer, the same math. Gravity's weakness, the leak fraction, showing near perfect barriers, also explains why atoms are stable. And now we understand that general relativity, gravitational redshift, light deflection, and GPS corrections all emerge as properties of fluid dynamics. It's clear that time is not dilated and space is not warped. But who knows, maybe warp drive is on the table. And wormholes are not a thing, as entanglement has been unentangled by long-distance topologically protected vortex lines. That same stiffness that gives you 1 billion times scale up from an electron to its wake. The split particle connects the split particle even at great distances. It's like cutting a high tension wire. It springs back faster than the speed of light. In this framework, dark energy density is modeled with two components. Wolowicz's self-tuning is the baseline that predicts how density changes during expansion. The second component is the density of the moraine crust. And I modeled this in two ways. The first is a dispersive shockwave energy envelope using parameters for the size, shape, and location. And the second approach finds the best density for each z value using a few different curve-fitting approaches. So as a baseline, the sum of the chi-squared error for the standard lambda CDM model is 820. And then the substrate shockwave model brought that down to 45. And then the fit curves all end up around 10. So the observational data is sparse and there are error bars, so the fit curves are not precise still. In each one, the same shape emerged. And it's the shape predicted by the framework when our expanding bubble wall hit the moraine at redshift z equals 2.2, traveling at Mach 1.3, faster than the local sound speed in the substrate. When it decelerated through the sound barrier at z equals 1.588, it produced a chirping undulate bore, a leading soliton upstream, a recovery zone where it crosses the critical point, and then a chirped wave train downstream where the wavelengths compress toward the low redshift. So this may well be our bubble's fingerprint. Here on Gaia, the canonical loop nests inside of each system with co-rotating layers surrounded by counter-rotating shear zones with polar jets. During its evolution, Gaia folded in a new layer at each evolutionary stage, each one organized by the substrate. See the Gaia section on lightfluid.org for a high-level picture on each one. The substrate also provides insights into the sun, a similar pattern to the Earth's core, but with plasma instead of iron. And plasma close to the breaking point for the lattice, which means that solar flares are reconnection events like seen with superfluid helium. And from the substrate perspective, DNA has the topology of a modon, a stationary one. It's a low stable point in free energy, and the lattice cell and sheet spacing line up with cellular features. There's so much more on these topics on the site. This is only scratching the surface. But one example from the Gaia section is how the substrate explains mitochondria, the cell's dynamo. It folds into every cell as a system with oppositional rotational energy. So it's the energetic counterbalance for the outer cell, and it helps us see cellular dynamics as a process mediated by the substrate. It's not chaos. In 1867, Kelvin proposed stable knots of circulation. He called it the vortex atom. And Maxwell built his theory on molecular vortices, but abandoned it as scaffolding. They could not explain inertia, and they could not explain why the electron did not collapse into the nucleus. They were missing the concept of a superfluid, the rotational energy built into the substrate. They had no model for topological protection due to all that energy. So to understand magnetism, it's no surprise that the same math that models atoms and gravity also describes the magnetic field as an organized DC1 substrate flow leaking through aligned atomic boundaries. It's the physical flow in the substrate you can feel. And now let's turn to a physical flow you can see. Science today is puzzled by the fact that clouds do not have enough energy to cause lightning. That energy is the substrate peeking out from behind the veil when electrons are pushed past the speed limit. Photons are ejected as gamma rays, and a lightning bolt forms as a cascade of vortices in the substrate. The substrate stores enormous energy. One DC1 vortex core has 1,000,000 times more energy than a typical atom. The substrate is a silent organizer for heat for all of these different scales, right up until its breaking point. Here's the high-level view of the bridge equation. It starts with the Weinberg angle, measured at particle colliders, which describes how fundamental particles mix. That gives us the mutual friction coefficient at the substrate boundaries. That tells us the dark matter density, the high versus low acceleration scale in space, and the galaxy rotation curves. The same density of all through the bubbles encountered with the previous cycle's crust gives us the dark energy oscillations. The same coupling squared gives us SH tension resolution. The disagreement between Planck and Weak's lensing surveys is resolved. It closely matches the number of inflation E-folds for the universe. So this is 7 domains threaded by one number, nothing strange or entangled, and reusing existed fluid dynamics equations. There's much more on lightfluid.org. The bridge equation, you can see the math. There's an experiments page and deeper dives into each of these sections. This is relatively late breaking work, and we're only scratching the surface of what the substrate framework will uncover. Let me know what you think and subscribe for updates. Thanks for watching.